Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Corporal Junho Park, Republic of Korea Army, 1st Infantry Division, 15th Armored Battalion, stationed at Camp Casey in Dongducheon. I've seen typhoons hit the eastern coast and experienced the occasional northern saber rattling across the DMZ. But nothing, not even the mandatory NBC drills, prepared me for the 12 hours that would follow the morning of October 4th, 2025. It began like any other Thursday. The air was crisp and dry, the last whispers of summer evaporating in the golden hues of a Korean autumn. Reveille sounded at 5 a.m. By 5:45, I was in formation, standing shoulder to shoulder with my platoon. Our squad leader, Sergeant First Class Min Jae Kim, barked roll call with his usual gravelly authority. Park Jun-ho. Here, Sergeant. I remember thinking it'd be a routine training day, maybe a gunnery drill or road march. I was wrong. At 6:15 a.m., we were ordered to the motor pool. The 15th Battalion's K-1A 1 main battle tanks had been fueled and prepped overnight. That was unusual. We hadn't been scheduled for field exercises until the following week. Even odder, the entire base was running on Alert Level Bravo. We loaded out without explanation. My squad, Alpha Team, was assigned to a K-808 wheeled armored personnel carrier. Our vehicle commander was Lieutenant Sang-woo Yoon, a relatively green officer from Kaffa, but competent and focused. He sat tight-lipped in the front cabin, receiving whispered briefings via the SOTAS digital comm system. "Where are we headed?" I asked Specialist Da-hyun, our gunner, who manned the K6.50 caliber machine gun mounted on the remote weapons station. He shrugged, then muttered, "Some kind of civil unrest down south, near Ujeongbu, maybe chemical accident." But it wasn't until 6:47 a.m. that the word quarantine came through the internal channel. Ujeongbu was locked down. No civilian ingress or egress, no cell phone signals. All public transit, including Seoul Metro Line 1, had been halted. Rumors flew: a gas leak, a terrorist incident, a biolab breach. By 7:20 a.m., our convoy rolled past Bosendong, the civilian town outside Camp Casey's gates. The streets looked deserted. Shuttered storefronts, no traffic, no foot patrols from the Korean National Police. A blue city bus had rammed into a family mart. Its windshield cracked, driver nowhere in sight. "Something's off," Sergeant Kim muttered beside me. "Way off." By the time we reached the outskirts of Yangjusi around 8:05 a.m., we encountered the first signs of panic. A black Hyundai Sonata sped past our column, horn blaring, with a blood-smeared handprint on the rear passenger window. Moments later, we passed a blocked expressway interchange, cordoned by Ministry of National Defense vehicles and KNP riot control buses. A civilian doctor from the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Dr. Hai-Rin So, boarded our APC for a direct briefing. She looked exhausted, her white coat stained with something dark. She was accompanied by a civilian liaison with a tablet running thermal imaging overlays. "This is not a chemical spill," she told us grimly. "This is a contagion. A neurological pathogen." "What kind of pathogen?" Lieutenant Yoon asked. "We don't know yet. All we know is that it spreads through bites or exposure to infected fluids. The incubation period can vary, sometimes as short as a few minutes. Victims display extreme aggression, loss of cognitive function, and complete resistance to pain." That was the first time I heard the word that still haunts me. "Reanimative behavior," she said. "They don't stay down when they die." We were tasked with securing the Yangju government complex by 8:30 a.m. The city had ceased all communications. The local police had gone silent. Our K-808 rolled past abandoned street markets and overturned delivery trucks. A blood trail ran down the slope of a shuttered GS-25. At 8:43 a.m., all hell broke loose. It began with static over the radio net, then a garbled distress call. Multiple infected, inside City Hall, officers down. We need backup. Lieutenant Yoon gave the order. Alpha Team dismounted and pushed on foot through the front lobby of the Yangju complex. The building was eerily silent, elevators frozen mid-floor, fluorescent lights flickering. And then we heard it. A sound I'll never forget. Not a scream, not a shout. Something between a howl and a distorted gargle. We swept in formation, rifles raised, passing through the atrium when a body slammed into the glass behind us. It was a man in a police uniform. Face mangled, eyes clouded, jaws gnashing at the reinforced panel like a starving animal. He should not have been moving. His abdomen was torn open. Part of his lung was exposed, heaving like a bellows. Private Taemin Lee froze in place. "He's still alive." Sergeant Kim didn't hesitate. He raised his K2 assault rifle and put 2 shots through the glass. The officer didn't flinch, he just smashed harder. "Contact rear side." The lobby exploded into chaos. From a side corridor, 4 more individuals, no, things, rushed at us. One was missing an arm. Another dragged a broken leg behind him, bones exposed. They moved fast, unnaturally fast. Da-hyun opened up with the K6 from the vehicle turret, laying down suppressive fire through the blown-open doors. I pulled back toward a service stairwell, covering Private Lee as he stumbled behind me. Sergeant Kim's voice roared over the comms. "Headshots, they only drop from headshots." It was true. Standard rounds to the torso didn't stop them. Even point-blank hits only delayed their charge. But a single controlled shot to the head, center mass on the forehead, brought them down instantly. We regrouped in the underground parking garage by 9 a.m., trying to establish contact with the battalion command. Static. No response. Dr. Seo was still with us, hands trembling as she pulled vials of something from her case. "Is that a cure?" I asked. She shook her head. "Sedatives. For emergency restraint, they won't work anymore. Their nervous systems are overloaded. It's like their brains are locked in overdrive." Lieutenant Yoon made the call. We were abandoning the complex. The mission had failed. Our new objective, secure survivors, extract to Camp Casey. We had 10 personnel left from our original squad of 16. 6 had gone missing during the lobby attack. No radio contact, no vitals. By 9:45 a.m., we were rolling southbound again, passing through mangled intersections and rows of abandoned vehicles. Fires had broken out in apartment buildings. Civilians ran in every direction, some screaming, some clearly infected, tearing through crowds in twisted parodies of human motion. We picked up 3 survivors outside a school in Gyeokgi-dong, a mother and 2 children. One of the kids had bite marks. The mother was sobbing, begging us not to leave them. Dr. So took one look and shook her head. "He has minutes," she whispered. The boy, maybe 9 or 10, was strapped to the rear cargo bench. We tried everything, ice packs, restraints. By 10:12 a.m., he began convulsing. Then he stopped breathing. Dr. Seo was mid-CPR when the boy's eyes snapped open. He lunged at her throat. Sergeant Kim reacted instantly, but even with his combat knife, it took nearly 30 seconds to bring the boy down. The mother was inconsolable, screaming herself hoarse until her voice broke into a whisper. We didn't speak for several minutes. It wasn't war. It wasn't terror. It was something else. Something primal. An inversion of all logic. "Where did this start?" I asked Dr. Seo quietly as we approached Ganyong Station in Ujongbu. "We think it originated at a research facility near Poshan," she said. "A virology lab working on neural regeneration. There was a breach last night. Patient 0 vanished." By 11 a.m., we were trying to re-establish contact with the command. The 1st Division HQ had gone dark. American forces at Camp Red Cloud were reportedly evacuating south toward Seoul. Then we heard the emergency broadcast tone over our APC's radio system. "This is a public safety announcement. Martial law has been declared in the northern Gyeonggi Province region. All civilians are instructed to shelter in place. The South Korean armed forces are now operating under National Defense Authority. Any signs of aggression or infection are to be reported immediately." We were ordered to hold our position and await further instruction. The city was collapsing around us. Fires, looting, screams from high-rises, and distant helicopters crisscrossing the skyline. At 11:47 a.m., our vehicle's thermal imaging picked up a horde approaching from the south. Dozens, no, hundreds of infected. A wave of movement through the main boulevard. We had less than 5 minutes to fortify or evacuate. Lieutenant Yoon chose to fortify. Evacuation was impossible. Traffic in Ujongbu had been at a standstill since morning, with hundreds of civilian cars blocking every major road like a rusted artery. South of our position, at the junction near Ganyong Station, the bodies of people who had tried to flee earlier in the day were sprawled across the pavement. Many of them were missing limbs. Some were still twitching. Our K-808 was positioned behind a burned-out city bus, giving us a partial line of sight down the boulevard. Private Jae-seok and I worked fast, dragging overturned scooters, trash bins, and even metal tables from a nearby cafe to build a haphazard barricade. Sergeant Kim and Specialist Dae-hyun reinforced the area behind us, preparing fallback lines along a side alley that fed into a smaller service road near an old community center. It wasn't perfect, but it gave us a narrow corridor to filter the infected through. A funnel. That was all we could hope for. The civilians we had rescued, including the grieving mother, were taken inside a shuttered hardware store. Dr. Seo did what she could to keep them calm, though I could see the strain in her expression. Her hands trembled constantly now. Whether from the cold or the trauma, I couldn't tell. She was running on willpower alone. By 11:54 a.m., we had eyes on the first wave. They moved like a tide, with no coordination, no formation, but with horrifying purpose. Most were civilians. Office workers, students, even uniformed police officers among them. Blood covered their faces and torsos, and some were missing large portions of flesh, their wounds revealing muscle, tendon, even bone. Their eyes were the most disturbing. Clouded, gray-white orbs fixed ahead with nothing behind them. Hunger, yes, but not consciousness. The first line of infected hit our barricade at full speed. The impact shook the reinforced plastic tables we had wedged between the bus and a light pole. One of the infected, a man in a delivery uniform, got tangled in a strip of broken fencing. I raised my K2 and fired a tight, controlled burst into his skull. He dropped instantly. The others scrambled over him, slipping in the blood, snarling like feral animals. "Fire in disciplined bursts," Sergeant Kim called out. "Aim for the head. Conserve your ammo." We opened up in tandem. The K6.50 cal on the roof of the K808 thundered, cutting through the front ranks with devastating precision. Brass shells clattered onto the road as the weapon cycled over and over. Dae-hyun was a machine behind the controls, tracking left to right with grim efficiency. But even as bodies fell, more kept coming. The infected showed no regard for casualties. They trampled the fallen. They climbed over one another. Some were crawling on their hands, dragging shattered pelvises across the pavement just to get within reach. By 12:02 p.m., the barricade was compromised. A pile of corpses, infected and otherwise, had formed at the front, creating a macabre ramp. Several infected cleared the blockade entirely, landing just meters from our position. One of them, a woman in a torn blazer, slammed into Private Jae-seok before he could get a shot off. They rolled together on the ground, his rifle knocked away. I moved without thinking. My bayonet was fixed. I plunged the blade downward, piercing the base of the woman's skull. She stopped instantly, twitching once before going still. Jae-seok gasped. Blood smeared across his neck from a shallow graze. We pulled back. The barricade was no longer tenable. Sergeant Kim gave the order. Fall back to the alley. We covered one another in a coordinated retreat, leapfrogging down the side street while keeping the advancing infected in our sights. The K-808 reversed slowly, its turret swinging to cover us, but it was too wide for the alley. Lieutenant Yoon remained in the vehicle with the driver, attempting to navigate around to regroup on the next block. At 12:11 p.m., we reached the rear entrance of the community center. It was locked. Sergeant Kim smashed the glass with the butt of his rifle, and we spilled into the building. An old concrete structure with narrow halls and reinforced stairwells. We swept it room by room, clearing offices, classrooms, and a gymnasium. The place had been used as an emergency shelter in previous typhoons. Mats and bottled water were already stacked along the walls. We sealed the entrances with filing cabinets and gym benches, and for the first time since the outbreak began, we had a few minutes to breathe. We checked ourselves over. 3 of us had minor wounds, scratches and bruises, nothing that broke the skin deeply. Jae-seok had been lucky. A few more seconds, and it would have been over for him. Dr. Seo tended to the survivors, whispering reassurances while her eyes scanned each of them for signs of fever or discoloration. By 12:30 p.m., we had power from a backup generator. A single desktop computer in the staff office connected to the military emergency intranet. The map showed massive red zones across northern Gyeonggi, Dongducheon, Yangju, Uijeongbu. Suwon was flashing yellow. Seoul's northern districts were holding, barely, but the southern areas were being overwhelmed. There were orders for all military units to consolidate at fallback positions south of the Han River. The bridges were being locked down. We were cut off. "There's a U.S. Army post nearby," Sergeant Kim said. "Camp Red Cloud. They might have evac routes." I checked the map. Camp Red Cloud was less than 4 kilometers southwest, near Hwado-man. If we moved fast and stayed off the main roads, we might make it. But the city was crawling. Every major artery was either gridlocked or overrun. We made contact with Lieutenant Yoon via encrypted radio around 12:45 p.m. His K-808 had looped around via Bak-Unsa Temple Road, but had come under heavy assault. He was holding position near a shopping center rooftop, using the armored vehicle's optics to scout alternate routes. His voice over the radio was terse but steady. "We can't make it back to your position without heavy losses. You'll have to move west and meet us halfway near the stream." It wasn't ideal. We were down to 8 soldiers, including me. Ammunition was running low. Most of us had burned through over half our magazines during the street engagement. Grenades were limited. Communications were sporadic, but we had to move. We broke out from the community center just after 1 p.m., taking a narrow pedestrian trail that wound through back alleys and parking lots. It was quiet, too quiet. The infected were drawn to sound, movement, and light. If we moved slowly and avoided sudden noises, we had a chance of slipping through unnoticed. Along the way, we passed scenes that would never leave my memory. A daycare center with tiny shoes scattered outside, blood smeared on the glass. A dentist's office with a body half hanging out of the second-story window, clothes torn. A neighborhood police substation where a single KNP officer had locked himself in a cell and taken his own life to avoid infection. His note, written in shaky Hangul on the wall, simply read, "Tell my daughter I kept my promise." By 1:20 p.m., we reached a small overpass spanning a canal. That's when the silence broke. A single infected staggered from beneath the bridge. A man in a postal uniform, dragging a broken leg behind him. We tried to pass quietly, keeping our distance, but then a civilian in our group, a young man in his 20s, panicked. He turned and ran back the way we'd come, screaming. Within seconds, the sound attracted dozens more. The infected poured from alleys, stairwells, even the rooftops. They ran on shattered limbs. Some dropped from balconies, ignoring injury. We opened fire, but it was too many. We ran. Crossing the bridge, we headed straight for the shopping district where Lieutenant Yoon had last reported. It felt like kilometers, but in truth, it was maybe 500 meters. Our boots slapped concrete, our rifles bouncing against our gear, hearts pounding. One by one, the civilians fell behind. I looked back once and saw the mother from earlier dragged down by 3 infected, her screams mercifully brief. By 1:32 p.m., we reached the shopping center. The K-808 was parked near a loading dock, its engine idling. Lieutenant Yoon opened the rear hatch as we scrambled aboard. The vehicle smelled of smoke and burnt oil. The air was thick with the residue of explosives, cordite and burnt rubber. The interior lights flickered as we piled in, the hydraulics groaning under the strain. Blood had dried on the bench seats and along the interior wall. Someone had bled out here earlier. Inside, Corporal Byung-woo gave us a terse nod before turning his focus back to the controls. The K-808's onboard computer showed scattered Blue Force indicators across the northern map sector. Most were static or blinking. Units either wiped out or in full retreat. The city behind us was lost. "We head west," Lieutenant Yoon said. "Nearest extraction point is the helipad at Camp Red Cloud. If they're still holding, we've got a chance." We lurched into motion, turning west down the elevated overpass that connected to Route 3. The highway was a graveyard of vehicles. Civilian sedans, buses, military jeeps, burned, overturned, riddled with bullet holes. Black smoke curled from a gas station ahead where a tanker had exploded. It painted the sky in smudged streaks. The radio played only automated emergency loops now, cycling warnings in Korean, English, and Mandarin. The voice of the president from early that morning was still being replayed, even though there were unconfirmed reports of an assault on the Blue House. We maneuvered carefully through the carnage. Sergeant Kim stood through the roof hatch, manning the K6 HMG with practiced vigilance, eyes constantly scanning for movement. I sat beside Private Jae-seok, who still looked pale from his earlier encounter. His bandaged arm trembled as he reloaded magazines, but he kept going, jaw clenched in silent determination. We reached the intersection near Jeongreung-ro by 1:48 p.m. The traffic ahead was too dense for the K-808 to pass, even with its armored mass. We dismounted, forming a staggered column with rifles ready. The civilians, only 2 remained, both middle-aged men who hadn't spoken a word since losing the others, were sandwiched in the center of our formation. Dr. Seo walked beside them, her medical bag slung tight across her body. We proceeded on foot through narrow alleyways and the remnants of suburban residential blocks. In front yards and balconies, drying laundry fluttered next to cracked windows. Children's toys were scattered across lawns. One front door was open, its interior dark, with flickering light coming from a wall-mounted television still displaying static. There were no birds, no animals, not even dogs barking. Just the distant echoes of chaos and the steady crunch of boots on broken asphalt. By 2:05 p.m., we approached the northern perimeter of Camp Red Cloud. The base had been decommissioned a few years earlier, with most of its operations transferred to Camp Humphreys in Pyeongtaek. Still, the helipad and some support infrastructure had remained. We weren't sure who would be left there, but we had no other options. The terrain on the southern side was mostly forested hill, and we'd be blind if we tried to move without satellite support. As we closed in, we encountered our first real resistance. A group of infected, around 20 or 30, emerged from a collapsed apartment complex near the base perimeter. They sprinted toward us with inhuman speed, dodging debris with limbs that shouldn't have supported such movement. Their eyes were white, their faces locked in open-mouthed snarls. We took cover behind a row of abandoned cars, using the narrow street to funnel them into our line of fire. Sergeant Kim directed suppressive fire from the center, while I and 3 others flanked left through a narrow shop front. As they passed our position, we unleashed a crossfire that dropped half of them instantly. The others hesitated, somewhat unusually, and then bolted in 2 directions. One of them tackled Private Min-jae from the side. They crashed through a glass storefront in a spray of blood and shards. We rushed to him, but he was already unconscious by the time we reached his side. The infected man had bitten through his neck armor and punctured the jugular. We didn't have time for debate. Sergeant Kim stepped forward, drew his K5 pistol and fired a single round into Min-jae's forehead. Clean, immediate. Dr. Seo said nothing. Her face was ashen. We kept moving. By 2:18 p.m., we reached the outer wall of Camp Red Cloud. The gate was sealed with reinforced barriers and 2 K-21 IFVs blocked the main entrance, but the towers were unmanned. We circled around the perimeter fence until we found a breach, a section of the chain link that had been cut and peeled back. We slipped through and made our way into the base proper. Inside, it was a ghost town. Most of the administrative buildings were shuttered or locked. Broken glass and scattered documents littered the main road leading toward the airstrip. We found several bodies in uniform, American and Korean, near the motor pool, most with spent magazines beside them. A few had clearly taken their own lives rather than be taken by the infected. Then, at 2:31 p.m., we saw the signal. A flare, red, launched from the helipad on the far end of the base. That meant friendly forces were still active. We double-timed it across the open field, passing the chapel and PX. Our boots kicked up dust as we moved between the barracks buildings, rifles sweeping left and right, fingers tight on triggers. The infected could appear from anywhere. No sound. No warning. As we neared the helipad, we saw them. U.S. Army personnel, maybe 15 in total, were dug in behind sandbags and cargo containers, covering the area with M240S and M4 carbines. Their commanding officer, a broad-shouldered man with the name Patch Bowers, waved us forward. His face was streaked with ash and sweat, but his eyes were clear. "You're the ROK squad from Ujeongbu?" he asked, voice raised over the rumble of rotors from a Blackhawk warming up behind him. "Survivors of it," Lieutenant Yoon answered. "How long until evac?" "Bird lifts off in 5 minutes," Bowers said. "It's the last one. Everything north of the Han is being abandoned." That hit like a sledgehammer. All of Gyeonggi-do left behind. Every civilian who didn't make it out, written off. That meant over 10 million people. My parents, my sister in Ilsen, gone. We loaded the wounded first. Corporal Dae-hyun, who had worsening burns, and Dr. Seo, who had begun coughing heavily. She insisted it was from smoke exposure, but I noticed the sweat on her neck, the shaking. Lieutenant Yoon nodded subtly at me. We both knew but said nothing. The civilians were next. The two men climbed aboard in silence, avoiding everyone's gaze. Then, with seconds left, we formed a perimeter as the Black Hawk spooled up. That's when the infected hit the compound. Hundreds of them, pouring through the same breach we had used. They scrambled over vehicles, fences, even the bodies of their own. American troops opened fire first, and we followed. The field became a war zone, tracer rounds streaking in all directions, the rotors of the Black Hawk whirling up dirt and smoke. The helicopter lifted slowly, straining under weight and urgency. We fell back to the command post, using the building's solid walls for cover. Sergeant Kim went down during retreat, caught by a leper that landed on him from the second-floor balcony. It tore into his chest with teeth and nails. Jae-seok tried to reach him but was dragged back by Lieutenant Yoon. "You can't help him," Yoon said. We made a final stand in the motor pool. Bowers coordinated a rear defense while his comms officer called for an airstrike on their own position. It was a last resort. "Better to burn it than let them take it," he said. By 2:56 p.m., we were running out of ammunition. I had one full magazine left. Jae-seok had fewer. The infected had surrounded the perimeter. The airstrike wasn't going to make it in time. Then, at 2:59 p.m., another helicopter, an Apache, screamed overhead and opened fire. The 30mm chain gun tore into the crowd of infected like a god's hammer, reducing bodies to pulp and tossing debris in all directions. Hellfire missiles impacted just outside the fence, sending black smoke billowing into the sky. It gave us just enough breathing room. The pilot radioed in one last order. "Fall back to the admin roof. We'll extract one load, maximum 5 bodies." 5? That's all we had. Yoon chose quickly. Himself, me, Jae-seok, Dr. Seo, and one American gunner. The others stayed behind. Bowers gave me a salute, then turned back to fire another burst with his rifle into the advancing horde. We climbed to the roof. At 3:07 p.m., the Apache returned. A small medevac bird dropped a ladder. We climbed as quickly as we could. The infected reached the stairwell as we cleared the roof, arms outstretched. Their howls rose over the rotors, shrieking with hunger and madness. I could see the whites of their eyes, their bloodied fingers stretching inches from my boots as I was pulled into the cabin by the American crew chief. Dr. Seo collapsed just after she was hoisted aboard, coughing hard, her chest heaving as the helicopter veered southward. As we banked away, the roof of the command building swarmed with infected. Dozens of them scrambled up the walls, leapt from adjacent buildings, or burst from broken windows. The Apache let loose another burst from its M230 chain gun. The rooftop disintegrated beneath the fury of the 30mm rounds, splattering gore and debris across the skyline. I stared out the open side door. Camp Red Cloud was consumed by fire and shadows. A fortress, overwhelmed and lost within a matter of hours. The sky over Ujeongbu darkened with smoke trails and rising ash columns. The distant sound of secondary explosions, likely from ammo caches or sabotaged fuel depots, shook the horizon. In the cabin, Lieutenant Yoon sat across from me, lips pressed tight, hand resting on the stock of his rifle. His eyes didn't blink. Private Jae-seok clutched his knees, rocking slightly. His ears had started bleeding from the blast pressure during our retreat. I didn't know if he could still hear. The American next to me, Specialist Mendez, according to his patch, passed around water and antiseptic wipes. The cabin was cramped and loud, and none of us spoke much. We didn't have to. The look in our eyes said everything. We had survived, but we had left too many behind. The medevac bird flew low along the Bukhan River before veering southeast. Below us, the urban sprawl of northeastern Seoul came into view. Dobong-gu, Nawon-gu, Mapo, all of it dotted with plumes of smoke and flashes of gunfire. The infected were spreading faster than anyone had predicted. No organized evacuation. No functioning command. Every bridge south of the Han River had been bombed or sealed. At 3:29 p.m., we were rerouted to a temporary quarantine station established at Hwarangdae, a small helipad complex within the now abandoned police training academy grounds. When we landed, medical staff in full biohazard suits surrounded the chopper, waving us forward. They took Dr. Seo first. She resisted, insisting she was fine, but her cough was worsening. I helped guide her to the triage tent while she trembled, gripping my arm as though afraid to fall. "We can't let them lock me up," she whispered. "If I go in there, I won't come out." I didn't have an answer. The moment she crossed into the quarantine zone, a staff member sealed the flap behind her. That was the last I saw of her. The rest of us were subjected to rapid biochecks, thermal scans, blood sampling, retinal dilation tests. Nothing invasive, but thorough. A middle-aged doctor from the Seoul Public Health Department, his hands shaking slightly, asked us a list of rapid-fire questions. Any direct exposure to infected bodily fluids? Any unexplained bleeding? Contact with someone symptomatic? None of us answered with full honesty. Yoon simply said, "Combat exposure only. No breaches." The doctor checked our papers and moved on. The truth wouldn't have helped anyone. By 4:12 p.m., we were cleared for relocation. Our squad, now just 3, was moved to a secondary command center established in a makeshift operations hub built inside an underground parking garage in Gangdong District. It was built to coordinate the defense of the remaining bridgeheads south of the river and to attempt communication with stranded Roca and U.S. forces cut off in the northern zones. The facility was crude, barely lit, and overcrowded. Maps of Seoul and surrounding districts were taped across concrete walls. Radios crackled nonstop. A handful of commanders, army, police, even fire department officials huddled around a whiteboard detailing possible resupply corridors. It wasn't strategy, it was triage. Lieutenant Yoon was pulled into an emergency briefing. Jae-seok and I were told to rest. We were given instant noodles and bottled water and told not to wander. I sat on a pile of sandbags near a broken vending machine and watched the corridor, half asleep, until Yoon returned. "They're moving civilians underground," he said quietly. "The subway tunnels, the stations from Goryeo to Cheonho have been fortified." "Seoul Metro?" I asked. "Won't that trap them if something breaches?" "It's already happened in some places," he said. "But they've got nowhere else to go. The bridges are sealed, evacuation south is limited to airlifts and convoys under fire. Command is collapsing." I didn't respond. The futility of it all was thick in the air. We'd spent the day fighting, running, saving who we could, yet the tide hadn't changed. The infected were still advancing, and we were merely shuffling the front line a few blocks south every hour. At 5:03 p.m., another air raid siren rang out. This time it wasn't a test. A scout drone had picked up a new horde moving down from Guri towards eastern Seoul. Thousands of infected. Moving fast, organized, not like the earlier wave. These ones weren't random. They moved in formations, avoiding terrain obstacles, flanking checkpoints. It wasn't just a disease anymore. The radio buzzed with code phrases and frantic orders. Strike teams were dispatched to set controlled fires in the approach zones. Artillery from the Han River batteries began shelling the far bank. I could feel the vibrations echo through the garage walls. And then, as I stared at a dusty CCTV feed mounted near the ceiling, I saw something that made my blood run cold. One of the infected stopped in the middle of a street, somewhere near Yonghwa-dong. It wasn't moving like the others. It looked up, directly at the drone, as if aware of its presence. It raised its hand. Not to attack, but to shield its eyes from the sun. It blinked. The feed cut out 2 seconds later. Static. By 5:28 p.m., our unit was rearmed. Orders came down from Combined Command. We were to escort a mobile generator convoy to a sealed metro entry point near Cheonho. The generator was critical for powering the underground air circulation systems, and if the infected got into the tunnels before it was delivered, everyone inside would suffocate. We boarded an armored logistics truck, accompanied by 2 ROKMC vehicles and a U.S. Army Stryker. The convoy rolled out through darkening streets, lights off, weapons hot. The city was silent now. Fires burned unchecked. Apartment buildings cast long shadows over broken roads. We passed several abandoned barricades near Olympic Park, once manned by National Guard reservists. Now, just scrap metal and burnt vehicles. Every few minutes we saw shapes moving in alleyways. We didn't stop to check if they were survivors or something else. At 5:52 p.m., we hit an obstruction near Gildong. An overturned city bus blocked the road. Our lead vehicle couldn't push through. We had to dismount and clear it manually. As we approached, I noticed bullet holes in the bus's rear windows and blood smeared across the doors. Inside, there were signs of a massacre. Dozens of bodies, most still strapped to their seats, others piled near the front. No movement. Until one of them twitched. The infected had been lying dormant, waiting, ambushing. They exploded from the shattered windows like a coiled trap springing open. Our squad opened fire immediately. I laid down suppressing rounds with my K2, careful with each burst. Private Jae-seok tossed a flashbang into the interior, temporarily blinding the group. A U.S. Marine corporal was pulled under the vehicle and never resurfaced. We cleared the last of them with grenades and dragged the bus carcass aside. I don't remember how long it took. Time was bending by then. Every second felt like a minute. By 6:17 p.m., we reached the metro entrance. Cheonho Station was sealed with welded steel and reinforced doors. A unit from the National Police Agency opened the interior gates as we pulled in. Inside, it was surreal. Families, elderly, even children, thousands of people, camped along the platforms and tunnels. Makeshift lights, rows of blankets, volunteer medics moving between injured. It felt like a city from another century, refugees in an underground ark. We hooked up the generator, lights flickered back to full. Air circulation returned. Lieutenant Yoon handed off the manifest. Then he looked at me. "We did what we could today," he said. "That has to be enough." But as I looked down the tunnel, past the sea of eyes and shaking bodies, I wondered how many more hours like this lay ahead. The outbreak wasn't just a biological catastrophe, it was a psychological one. Each survivor carried their own apocalypse. At 6:45 p.m., we sat in silence on the edge of the platform, listening to the rumble of distant shelling above ground. Somewhere in the darkness of Seoul's veins, infected were learning, adapting, breaching. 12 hours ago, I was a regular soldier on a routine patrol in Ujeongbu. Now, I was part of a war with no name, no front, no plan, only survival. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.